I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 84. Today in the show, we're joined again by one of our favorite past guests, Hank Shaw, and we're diving deep into everything you need to know to take your venison cooking to the next level. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today, with the holidays quickly approaching, we are talking food. And joining us is a repeat guest, Mr. Hank Shaw. And if you remember back from, I think it was episode number 65, Hank is one of the leading culinary experts on cooking wild game. He's a blogger at Hunter, Angler, Gardener, Cook, and the author of several great wild game-related books. And in that first episode we had with Hank, he shared some really incredible advice on properly handling your big game in the field, butchering, and finally how to best cook it, and a bunch of different ideas on venison cooking. But that was kind of a smaller portion of our podcast, just that last third. And today we wanted to dive further into that aspect and really go deep into the cooking side of venison because, meat and cooking, after all, it's what this whole hunting thing is about. So today, Hank is going to help us understand a whole plethora of different preparations and ideas for cooking venison. And hopefully, we all have freezers full of venison by now with which we can test these new cooking tips and ideas. And especially with Christmas and all the other holidays on the horizon, there should be plenty of opportunities to share that venison with our family and friends. So I'm looking forward to it. I think Hank's going to have some great stuff to share with us, and he's always a fun guy to talk to as well. But before we give Hank a call, my co-host and I have to go off on a brief tangent, as we do every week, and I need to share some very sad news. I, your host, Mark Kenyon, have been crushed in the Wired Hunt Trail Camera Contest. Congratulations, Dan.
Thank you. What was the final score or percentage?
Well, I looked earlier this morning, and when I last checked, you had a vote of 68% for your buck, Gordon Bombay.
Bombay.
He definitely passes the eye test.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'll be honest. I think that if it came down, the score would actually be closer than what everybody thinks. But I think they're right up there in that 180 mark.
Yeah, I agree. I think Gordon probably takes it. He's just got a lot of stuff going on, but a lot of impressive deer there that were up for consideration. I think that's the moral of the story. So
that's right.
Unfortunately, neither of us killed any of them.
No, but you did get. And so, dude, I don't know what it is. I just love checking trail cameras.
Yeah.
I mean, if I wasn't a hunter, I like my buddy. He's not a hunter. He's not going to go out in a bow or with a gun and shoot a deer. But he loves checking his trail camera. He got a new farm, that farm with all the big deer on it that I talk about every once in a while.
Oh yeah.
And he just loves I talked him into getting a couple trail camera, and he just loves it.
Yeah, they're addicting. It's a lot of
Yeah.
fun. It's a huge part of now, I think, yours and my just our hunting season enjoyment in general. A big part of it is just getting the pictures, seeing who's there, seeing what bucks are moving through the area. I think it's fair to say that we both just love deer and seeing them and looking at them and thinking about them. So pictures definitely help with that. That's for sure.
And right now I have one of my trail cameras set on video mode, so it's taking like 15-second bursts of footage.
Nice.
And some of that stuff's just really cool. You can a little bit more than what a picture shows, like what doe is the mature doe and like the alpha doe of the group. Like when she comes in, she rules the roost, just like bucks have a ranking. Right. So do does. That's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, for some reason I just never turned my video mode on. I don't know if it's because I'm just paranoid that something will go wrong, but I never turn it on. But I probably should, especially this time of year when I'm, not so much in hunt mode. It's more so just getting some pictures just to see who's around. It would be fun just to see that behavior.
That's right.
I agree with that. So,
my guest.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about.
My guest.
Have you started thinking about it? Wow.
Well, I've contacted Ric Flair's people a couple times, and no, I haven't. I don't know when you're planning on doing this actual podcast, but I want to make it some badass guest, like
of course,
some guy or gal or whoever that's just going to be like, yes. And then,
that's your only criteria for the guest, is that
a guest that makes everybody go, yes. And then, maybe he'll just sit and talk the whole time and you just sit back in awe. Maybe he'll give some pointers. Maybe he won't. Maybe he goes off on a tangent about, why he feels Busch Light is the best beer in the nation. I don't know.
Are we going to talk about deer at all on this Dan hosted podcast?
I think that it should be a main focus because, after all, this is a deer hunting podcast, and that's why people tune in every day.
That's true.
Or every week. But I feel there needs to be a little hot sauce in with this episode.
I would expect nothing less.
So I have to do a lot of thinking. And so if it's official and I did win the bet, I feel that I want to do some proper planning and not jump to conclusions and just be like, hey, you're on the show, Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's fair. You won fair and square, so you get to host an episode. And I'm thinking sometime in the next couple months. So you just you keep on thinking, shoot me your ideas, and we'll make it happen.
Oh, this is going to be glorious. I cannot wait until, and I don't even know if I want to tell you who the guest is. I just want, as we're doing our intro, we're doing our intro, and it's just like, okay. And today's guest is Gordon Bombay, and I actually interview a deer on the show.
If you pull that off, that'd be probably a first for the podcasting world, I'll say. Oh man, well, I'm looking forward to it too. It'll be nice just to sit back and let Dallas Fort Worth take it away for our show.
Right. I can imagine there's a good chance that your sponsors call you and they're like, yeah, man, we're done. I want all the refunded money that prorated back to us.
Well, I agreed. I agreed that we would record a podcast episode with you being the guest. I never agreed to publishing it.
Okay, I see where this is going now. There's always those asterisks.
Yes, the small print. You didn't read the small print on this one.
And you had to. I don't blame you. I'm not trustworthy.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. It'll be good. It was a fun bet. I'm glad we finally got it posted. Sorry it took so long, but
yeah,
made it happen. I owe you a meme because I won the other bet. So,
that's right.
I actually started on one, made one, and then my wife gave it the thumbs down. So I need to do a new one.
2 thumbs down.
Yeah, she didn't think it was funny enough. So
that's funny because my wife thinks a lot of the stuff I do is not funny, but I find it really funny.
Right.
Which, that's dumb. But then I don't know. I think maybe our senses of humor are just more superior than our wives.
Keep that quiet. She might listen to this one.
She doesn't.
This is the cooking episode. My wife might. So.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. We may have to do some editing.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, geez. Well,
I'm hungry.
We're hungry. You've got a couple doughs in the freezer, right?
Yep.
And I've got 3 in the freezer. And I've been trying to put a 4th in there, but struggling. I've been out doe hunting lately and had another issue with my muzzle loader last weekend, just like what happened last year, like almost the exact same thing with misfires. So I'm about to throw this thing in the river, but I don't know.
I'll tell you what, and we'll talk a lot about this when we get Hank on the air, but I need to step up my wild game cooking game.
Yeah.
I'm not good at it.
Well, I think we kind of touched on it the first time we had Hank on, but definitely, hopefully today it's, we spend so much time planning and putting in the time to hunt these deer, kill these deer, get them in the freezer. It's only right that we should put as much thought and time into making sure we cook and eat them as best as possible too, right?
That's right.
So, yeah, I've been trying to do the same thing, trying to up the game, and I'm lucky. My wife is very fortunate that she really likes, trying new things, and she's really into venison and wild game and all that kind of stuff. So it's been fun. That's kind of actually been a cool thing for us to do together. I've been able to kind of, she's connected on stuff that I'm into. She goes fishing with me and stuff, does the outdoor thing. But this is an example where I've been trying to get more into something that she's really passionate about, the food side of things, and it's been cool. So I think Hank should have some great ideas for us to help us all get a little better, trying some new things. And I think we both took some things away from our first episode with Hank, and we only talked about cooking in that one for like 20 minutes. So today we'll get a full show just about the cooking and preparing and all that. And there's a lot to talk about there. So I'm pretty stoked.
Booyah!
Should we just make it happen?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, we will pause briefly from our word.
When are we? Okay, let's just start over.
Yeah.
Let's just start over. Now a word from our sponsor.
Yeah. In all seriousness, we're going to take a break for a word from our partners, and then we'll give Hank a call. So let's try it from there. All right. So as promised, we need to pause for a word from our partners at Sitka Gear. And with us today is whitetail category leader Dennis Zuck. And I wanted Dennis to tell us a little bit more about a new piece of gear that Sitka launched this year called the Shacket. And that's essentially a t-shirt jacket. And I mention this because we're currently running a holiday sweepstakes, as we mentioned last week, in which we're giving away one of these shackets. So Dennis, what is the Shacket, and where did this idea come from?
Yeah, and for us, it started with, putting no boundaries on ourselves and thinking about, who's our guy and what's he doing? And, our guy was, he was archery hunting, and he needed all his range of motion. But he also cared a lot about, warmth and staying in the stand for a while. So our shacket was, we've all owned a vest, right? We've all owned a jacket. We've all owned, these pieces. And somewhere along the line, somebody told you lose so much heat through your head. Well, where you lose a lot also is underneath your arms. And, we started thinking about this idea of creating, keeping those forearms open, where typically most of us don't get that cold in our forearms. When we're trying to shoot our bow, but still making sure that we capture that heat that we would be losing in a vest configuration underneath our arms. Lo and behold came the shacket. It was non-conventional. It wasn't something people were used to. But I'll tell you what it's done is it's changed people's idea of being warm and how much or how little, in that matter, they can wear and still be fairly comfortable in the stand. So it's a piece we're really proud of. We think it pushes the boundaries, and that's what we think. We try to push the boundaries, and not for the sake of pushing boundaries, for the sake of creating a better product.
So if you are interested in learning more about the Sitka Gear Shacket, make sure you visit sitkagear.com. And also, if you want to try to win the one shacket that we're giving away, make sure you go to wiredtohunt.com/holiday to enter our sweepstakes, which is open until Christmas Eve. And I can say personally, I've worn the shacket on probably 90%, maybe 80% of my hunts so far this year, and it's really become one of my favorite pieces, so it's worth checking out. Now, though, it's time to get Hank Shaw on the line. All right, with us now on the phone again is Hank Shaw. Welcome back to the show, Hank.
Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, you were one of the guests that we got some of the best feedback about. So despite my better judgment, I decided to invite you on again, Hank.
Well, it's good to hear. I always it's better that than people throwing digital arrows at me.
Yeah. Oh no, we really enjoyed having you as a guest back. I think it was episode 65 is what is in my head, I think. And that time we did talk. One of the things that stuck with me is that you made 3 Star Wars references, which is a first for the Wired Hunt podcast. And I really enjoyed that. And so now with episode 7 of Star Wars coming out this week, I got to ask, are you pretty excited about that?
I'm going to see it. I'm not waiting in line for it, but I'll absolutely watch it. I've seen them all. I've been watching it since I was 6 years old.
Yeah. What about you, Dan? Are you pumped?
Am
I the only nerd on this podcast? Am I the only one who's really pumped?
No, I have some nerd tendencies too, but I haven't literally been to this is going to sound weird, but I haven't been to a movie theater since that whole Colorado deal.
Really? Now,
Yeah.
because of that or just by happenstance?
Maybe it's subconscious.
Wow.
For me, it's the cost. I mean,
Yeah.
it's got to be a big movie for me to go see it. And Star Wars qualifies.
Well, I sneak my stuff in anyway, so
You sneak a box of popcorn in underneath your jacket?
Oh, are you kidding? He's got venison jerky.
dude. Hey, back in high school when starter jackets used to be the in thing, I could put a whole large pizza under my jacket.
You still wear those, Dan, don't you?
Come on, Mark. Duh.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
I just bring a flask of bourbon.
That's the key to a good movie right there.
Oh,
That's
a good idea.
I have to make an admission. I am such a big nerd that I'm going to the opening night showing.
At midnight, right?
Well, it's supposed to be the midnight showing, but it's at 7:00. So it's like the old man's midnight showing, I guess.
Well,
All right, so
congratulations,
you do realize I'm going to have to force choke you if you give out spoilers on the Facebook.
Yeah, I'll have to hold it in. I've heard good things so far. I just saw. I don't want to read any reviews or spoilers or anything, but there were just some tweets of people who watched the premiere, and so far good stuff. So
This is a hunting show.
this is you're right. We probably should move on from this because we already spent 10 minutes before we got Hank on the phone talking about stupid stuff, and now here we are with Star Wars.
So would you use a broadhead for a bantha?
Yeah. My guy who edits video, who helps me edit my videos for Wired to Hunt, he's kind of a nerd too, and he throws random Star Wars references out in his emails to me, and my wife helps handle some of my email stuff just to kind of filter some things. And she saw him, he emailed me, and he called me a fuzzy-headed nerf herder, and that's an animal in Star Wars. And she's like, "What
Wow,
in the world?"
That's a deep dive too.
Yeah. And I think we should stop, or else we're gonna go down a dark hole here with Star Wars stuff. So Hank, like we were talking about a minute ago, we're excited to spend this whole hour and a half here, or whatever it's going to be, just talking about cooking venison, which we've all hopefully been doing a lot now that we're into December, and a lot of us have been hunting for a few months and should have, hopefully, some venison in the freezer. So I kind of want to dive into all sorts of things as far as cooking, as far as different ways to prepare venison, different recipe ideas, sauces, marinades, all sorts of kind of stuff on that. But I kind of want to start at the beginning here and look at our scenario, or sort of our setting for this type of thing, and that's the kitchen. So today we're in the kitchen. And what I wanted to ask you first, Hank, is let's imagine a hypothetical guy or girl, maybe a stereotypical young bachelor, let's say, who's listening to the show, who hunts but has never really taken his cooking game to the next level. He always just kind of does the basics. He throws some steaks on the grill. He makes hamburgers.
Seasoning.
Lowry seasoning, exactly. Exactly. So for this guy or girl who's not really there yet, but is intrigued and interested, I first want to know, what kind of kitchen tools or appliances or something, what do we need to start taking our venison cooking game to the next level from a tool standpoint? Do we need cast iron pans? Do we need some special knives or certain pots or certain anything? I don't know. What from that standpoint, just to get us started with the right gear? We deer hunters, we like talking about gear. What kind of gear do we need to take our venison game to the next level? That's the first thing I want to know about.
You don't need much, and I'm sorry to disappoint the gearheads, but a good frying pan, either cast iron or stainless steel. You don't really need a nonstick for venison. In fact, you don't want it because Nonsticks don't do well with very high heat or with acidic sauces. You're going to want a set of good tongs, metal tongs, not the stuff with the rubber or silicone on the end. You want metal tongs to flip things. You want a wooden spoon, ideally two, one to stir with and one that has a flat edge so that you can scrape the bottom of pans with. The reason why you want it wood and not metal is so you don't ruin your pans. And you want a Dutch oven or any kind of like a Le Creuset, those big heavy pots with a lid on them. You can do pretty much anything with those two things. I mean, if I were to add beyond that, a very good kitchen knife. Let's see. I would say a roasting pan. Doesn't have to be a big one, but a roasting pan.
So for the culinary inept like myself to a degree, a couple of these things. So a roasting pan is just one of those rectangle type pans, right? That's sort of deep. Am I right?
Exactly. You can get the cheap foil ones in the supermarket.
Yeah.
You want a good one. One made of steel or enamel lined or something that you can wash and use for years and years and years. I've used mine for 15 years.
Okay. And then the Dutch oven. I'm familiar with, like a cast iron Dutch oven, the big, really heavy duty type deal. But you mentioned another French word. Can a big pot work, or does it really need to be that thick cast iron type thing?
You want something reasonably thick. Le Creuset, Creuset.
Yes.
It's enamel coated iron, and it's sort of an indoor kitchen Dutch oven, and they last for generations. I mean, you can pick them up at yard sales or at thrift stores. It's usually because the old lady died and the thing is still doing well. They don't go bad, and you can get them cheap or they're good Christmas presents or whatever. But a big, hefty steel, iron, enamel pot is good, and you want it heavy because it retains heat better, so you can stew something either in the oven or on the stovetop for a long time at very low heat, and it will maintain. The thinner anything is, the faster it will heat up, but the problem is the faster it will cool down, and you want something that can hold heat, which is why a great number of cultures will cook in ceramic or in clay.
So you mentioned a good cooking knife or good cutting knife or kitchen knife. Is there any one single knife? Is there one knife I could get away with covering most of the tasks for me, or should I get one of those sets that has like the 7 or 8 different knives for paring and all the other stuff?
2 knives will do. I mean, we're just talking about cooking now, not butchering, but
Yes,
2 knives will do. A paring knife and a chef's knife. That's all you need.
And the chef's knife is the pretty big one, right?
It's the one that you stab people with when they break into the house.
That's what I was thinking in my head.
That one.
Yes, that one.
All right, perfect. So was there any other items on the list? I kind of interrupted you there. Sorry.
No, I was just sort of thinking on the fly. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking what I use every day. I mean, everything I talk about right now is going to be what I use, but it's bonus points. A sieve, a fine mesh sieve, to strain sauces to make them a little bit more refined, which I like to be a little bit more refined.
Yeah. Tough for Dan, but you can do it. Pull it off there, Dan.
A couple of different size pots. Sometimes you want something to make a sauce out of. Then, I use what's called a butter warmer. It's a very small steel pot, and that's good to heat up milk for coffee. But it's also good if you're doing a very small side thing like a cranberry sauce that you don't need a lot of. Fish spatula. You can find them on Amazon, and it's a special spatula that's very thin, and the very end of it is sort of a blade. It's not a super sharp blade, but it's beveled, and they're used to flip fish, and that's what you can use it for. But it is the best spatula that you'll ever use. It becomes part of your hand.
So just that beveled edge makes it a lot easier to get underneath things or scrape stuff from the bottom if you need to.
And yes, and they're angled. So right hand, I'm left-handed, so I had to actually special order one because people are bigoted against us left-handed people. I'm protesting later today.
Fair enough.
But most of them are coming right-handed, and they're really amazing tools.
Interesting. What about is it worth? And again, this is I know this is going to come down to just how far you want to go with it, but is it worth for someone in this type of situation, like we're mentioning, taking the next leap and getting something like a smoker or a green egg or any of these other kind of specialized type things to up our game? Is that something that, is worth looking at if you want to really take it to the next level, or is it, can you do some of the same things just in your oven?
I think a smoker is definitely a valuable tool, but that's sort of the next level kind of deal.
Yeah. How expensive?
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Ugh, fake sneeze. I hate those. Sorry.
No problem. Happens to the best of us. Can you get away with a smoker at a reasonable price?
Yes. What I started with, and when I was that young bachelor, is I used my Weber grill. The big, the circular grill that you can just buy at any store.
Mm-hmm.
What you do to make it a smoker is you don't put that many pieces of charcoal on one side of it, and you put some wood, and you keep the other half of the circle completely free of charcoal. And you can put one of those cheap foil roasting pans that we just talked about,
mm-hmm.
and put some water in it, and then you put your meat over that, so it can drip into the water. And if it's hot out and you really need to keep the temperature cold, then you can put ice in it, and so you can keep it very, very cold. Now, obviously, the ice will melt, but it keeps that chamber very, very cool. So you can set that up pretty cheap. I mean, less than a couple $100.
No, that's a pretty cool idea. That's definitely one of the things I've been thinking about is, trying different types of smoked meats, jerkies, things along those lines. I've been trying to figure out, the best way to do that. Which I want to specifically ask about that jerky. But before I get to that, really quick, I kind of want to close out the kitchen, stocking up my kitchen piece here.
I got a quick question in regards to, can you get away with not having some of those items and still bring the meat or your game to its, I guess, greatest potential as far as flavor is concerned?
Well, what item are you thinking about leaving out?
Well, I mean, right now I have very few of those items. I have a saucepan and I have a really good set of knives, and that's just about it.
You need the pot.
Okay.
Because your two fundamental ways of cooking game are hot and fast or slow and low. And if you don't have a good pot like that, you're really behind the eight ball. So I mean, given what you just told me, you've got a saucepan and you got good knives, you need the pot. And then, wooden spoons are $3. So, suck it up. Buy one.
But I mean, can I get, let's say for a guy who has absolutely every one of those products that you mentioned, as opposed to a guy who has only got like 50% of the products, those kitchen utensils, can we still get the same flavor and have the same end result in our meat?
Sure. It just makes it easier.
Gotcha.
What about a crock pot? Do you ever use a crock pot, or do you just use like a Dutch oven and simulate the same type of slow cooking method?
Mostly I use the Dutch oven, but the crock pot or any kind of slow cooker, it really comes into its own if you have a day job. Now, mind you, I no longer have a day job. This is what I do for a living. So I can hang around and watch a pot. And it's not like I'm sitting there staring at it, but, I can wander in and make another cup of coffee and like, oh, yeah, it's still good. So, but if you've got to make something like a braised venison shoulder, for example, you're going to want to do that in the crock pot, because if you got to go to work all day, you just want to keep it, at a kind of a dull roar. And it's do you know the origin of the crock pot?
No idea.
It's a fascinating story. I had no idea until recently, but apparently an Orthodox Jewish guy said, how the hell am I going to eat on Sabbath? It's because of the Orthodox. They can't do anything, right? They can't cook, they can't even answer the phone.
Yeah.
So he invented this thing for, I think, beans. And so it was originally a bean pot. And that he would make it before sundown, and it would cook until the Sabbath was over, I guess. And then they could sit there and they'd have dinner. And
wow.
One of his goy friends is like, I know, that would be great for, pretty much everything. And so, a revolution was born in cooking. And it's just, I used to hate on him a lot because, there's too many times. Okay, I got to tell this one story. It's not venison related, but it's game related. It's hilarious. I was at an event in South Dakota, and our hosts. I'm going to leave some proper names out of here just to protect the innocent and the guilty.
Sure.
And our hosts they were all stoked to give us this fancy pheasant send-off meal. It was like, oh yeah, we got a pheasant tonight. Woo, yeah. We're all excited, you know. Everyone's looking at me like, you know, waiting for, you know, me to heap condemnation on everything. I was very, very polite, and then because I didn't know what they were going to cook. So out it comes, and apparently what they had done is they had thrown several whole but skinned pheasants into a crock pot and dumped cream of mushroom soup over it
Oh no.
and let it cook for I don't know how many weeks. It was this brown, and all the bones were in there too. So it's like basically everyone's looking at each other, and I said under my breath to the guy to my left, "It's pheasant apocalypse." So,
And it wasn't a bad joke. It was the real deal, huh?
no, it was one of the top 4 worst things I've ever eaten in my life. It was a nightmare.
Ugh. That is an old standby, though, right? Throw some meat in the crock pot with cream mushroom soup, and you're good.
Oh, for the love! No,
A lot
you're
of
not.
people. A lot of people said that.
Not good. Just, you know, will you die from it? Probably not. But I make no guarantees. It's an abomination.
Yeah, it's a fair point. The crock pot, though, like you said, it can come in really handy for some things.
Chili, slow cooked soups, stews, braises. It's great for that.
Yeah. And they're not too expensive. They're not too expensive at all. It's pretty cheap tool.
Again, thrift stores and weekend yard sales.
Yeah. You have one of those, Dan?
I do have a crock pot, and my first question to you is, so I should not cook my venison roast in a crock pot with like potatoes and carrots and all that.
If you wanted to, then that's kind of a German pot roast style.
Gotcha.
But, you know, you're not going to get a nice roast out of it. You're going to get kind of a pot roasty, and that's fine. I would do it with a neck or a shank or a shoulder rather than a hind leg roast.
So my issue is that I typically overcook my meat in that scenario because
You have to in a crock pot.
I time it wrong. Is there a way to not cook it all the way and like get more of a medium in a crock pot, or is that just what it's for? Cook the crap out of it.
Yeah, the latter. You know, it's not possible to really. I mean, I suppose theoretically it could be possible, but it's more trouble than it's worth. Don't even try it. It's cook the crap out of it.
But the key with that, correct me if I'm wrong, Hank, but you know, from my experience with a crock pot or slow cooker, right, is you do cook the crap out of it, but because you do it for so long and so slow, that it actually does become really tender and great because you cooked it for so long and at such a low heat. And so even though you're not, you know, there's, like you said, there's hot and fast, which keeps, you know, kind of, you want it medium rare or whatever, but then this is the other way, cook it forever for a really slow period of time, and then you also still get really tender, juicy meat with, as long as you put liquid and stuff in there, right?
Oh, precisely. I mean, in fact, the recipe I have on my website right now is a braised venison shoulder that has a Mexican mole with it, and that's how I cook the venison. It's just very, very slow, and then eventually it just all that connective tissue just melts, and it makes everything silky and super, super tender. It will change the way that you look at these parts of the animal if you start cooking this way.
Yeah, we actually, my wife and I actually use your venison barbacoa recipe this Saturday with a neck roast that we use a crock pot just to slow cook it all day, and that turned out pretty delicious.
Oh yeah, just shred that puppy and put it on a tortilla and you're good to go.
That was money. It was great. We went hunting in the evening, came back and had some tasty venison tacos. So last kitchen question that I had, at least if I can take a step back, is we've got the tools that we need, the key essential tools. What about key spices? What are the mandatory minimum spices or herbs or something like that I should have on hand if I want to be able to tackle some of these next level preparations?
Hold on.
God
Real
bless you.
sneeze.
Yeah, God bless you. It's a good one.
The minimum spices that you want are going to be salt, pepper, and in my opinion, celery seed. The reason why I want celery seed is because celery seed sprinkled on a roast or a backstrap steak right near the end makes the meat taste more of itself. It's one of those secrets that we learned I used to work at a steakhouse, and that was our kind of our secret. It was in our mix that we would grind over the meat as it was resting, and there's your secret for the day.
Is that the same as celery salt? I think I've heard of celery salt. Is that a thing?
Celery salt is a thing, but celery seed is different.
Okay. So don't use the latter.
Yeah, you want to use celery seed. They're tiny, tiny, tiny little seeds that you can just sprinkle a few of them on along with your salt and pepper, and you'll notice the difference and you'll like it.
Okay.
I know it probably makes a difference of what type of meat or cut you're actually cooking, but you said on that particular instance you're sprinkling the salt and pepper and celery seed towards the end of the process. Is that what you want to do with game? Season it towards the very end, or are we seasoning it some cuts at the beginning while the meat is still raw?
Everything is different, but salt is different from everything else too. You have to remember. So salt is your basic seasoning. I salt early and often. So when the meat comes out, I very rarely cook cold meats. I mean, there are exceptions that we can get into, but in general, I will take a piece of meat out and let it come to room temperature. And when it comes out of the fridge, I salt it, and that does two things: that protects it from the warming temperatures, and it starts to season the meat right off the bat. And then I will cook it, and then I will season it at the end. Now, if it's slow cooked, like the shoulder or the neck or something, do the same thing. Then you brown it, and then you make your braise or your stew or whatever, and then you season that, and then you let it cook for however long it's going to cook, and then you season it a third time right before you serve it. But pepper and celery seed and any other spices that you want to use, they're all, for the most part, pretty volatile. So, for example, just try this. Make a stew and put as much pepper as you want in at the beginning. Now, make the same stew and put as much pepper as you want at the end. You will notice a radical difference. Pepper is extremely volatile, which is why I never buy pre-ground pepper. It's lost almost everything. You want the cheap, easy answer for good pepper is to buy those pepper mills that the pepper's already in the mill and you just grind it as you don't have to buy a pepper mill. Do that. Every tiny little market I've ever seen has them, and just buy that, and you'll be shocked. Oh, this is why there was a spice trade. This is why people went to war over black pepper. And if you get it pre-ground, you're like, I don't get it.
So you're saying that the pepper grinder, makes a big difference. You get the little peppercorns in there and you grind it up yourself.
A huge difference.
Wow, that's an interesting idea. That's something we don't have.
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
Hey, while we're on the topic of spicing your food and flavoring it, so my wife, gives the typical excuse, this is too gamey for me. I'm not a fan of it because it's too gamey, whatever. And then me, I love the gamey taste, I guess if we're going to call it that. Is there a way to meet in the middle, or is it just one of these things where it's either you like it or you don't?
I'd be interested to sort of interrogate your wife about this whole gamey thing, because I hear it all the time, and I'm assuming that you know how to take care of your venison. I'm assuming that you didn't drive around a truck for 3 days looking, hey, look at my deer. I'm assuming you took care of it.
That's what it was. Oh man.
No.
Okay. Yes, that's. I mean, if it's aged well and it was treated well and you cooled down the carcass, if the meat's treated well, it doesn't taste gamey at all. There's no gamey. To me is a high taste. It's a kind of it's a funky taste. It's like ruffed grouse have it in spades. Ruffed grouse are one of the gamiest, game animals I've ever eaten. Woodcock are sort of similar, but virtually nothing else has that funk unless you age the heck out of it. And, most of us don't do that with venison. So what is she getting at? I think she's getting at either a minerality that is in fresh venison, it is more coppery irony than a comparable piece of beef, and that's largely because it's free of all fat. And the other thing that's going on is because it's free of all fat, or most fat, what she's keying off of, and what most people are keying off of, is the profile flavors of corn. Because everything we eat in a supermarket ate corn. Pigs, definitely cattle, and definitely chickens are all heavily fed on corn. And that creates a very specific flavor profile that if you've been eating it for your whole life, which most people have, everything that is not that flavor profile is the only word they have in the vocabulary for it is gamey. And it's not. It's a misnomer. It just tastes like venison. It tastes like something that's not corn. And people kind of get hung up on it, and they just have to get over it. I mean, animals don't all taste like corn, and there's nothing you can do about it. You know, I mean, it tastes of what it is.
Yeah, it seems like gamey is just one of those labels that people throw on anything that doesn't taste like beef. Is kind of what I kind of see from so many people. Like, oh, it tastes gamey. They're just saying, oh, it just doesn't taste like the red meat I usually eat. I think is what I hear from a lot of people, at least.
Precisely. Now, I mean, here's an example. Lamb. Lamb is gamey. And you know why lamb is gamey? It's not fed on corn. You know, here's a weird one that'll throw you. Kid goats and lamb. Kid goat, you would think, would be way more gamey. Absolutely not. Kid goat is some of the most mild, sweet. It's almost like pronghorn. Like if you've ever had a really nicely treated pronghorn antelope, it's like kid goat. Whereas a lamb, it's got a stink on it. You know, even young lambs, I can absolutely tell if you're cooking lamb in the house.
Speaking of pronghorn, I've heard some people say that pronghorn is awful, and then I've also heard a couple people say it's their favorite game meat in the world. What do you think, Hank? Is it pretty good?
It's all preparation. It's, you know, it can be both. And here's the thing. Antelope, I've shot a bunch of antelope. Antelope, you often shoot them in hot weather. Well, that's a problem because antelope's hides retain heat way better than a deer's hide does. Second, antelope are nervous animals. I mean, I don't know if you ever shot one, but you shoot them, you think poorly of them, and they fall over and die. And they're just like, oh, I'm dead. Boom. And they just watch any of the TV shows. They're just like, oh, that one ran. And it ran like 9 steps and died. You know, they just die. I mean, that's what they do. And so, I mean, because they're very nervous animals. I mean, you notice like trout are nervous animals. Shad are nervous animals. Certain fish will just die as soon as you just take them out of the water. Whereas like a catfish, you can have a conversation with it for 3 hours and then put it back in the water and be like, hey, see you later. You know, and so you have those things going against you if you're an antelope hunter. What you need to do is you drop your animal, take your hero shot, gut the animal in the field, which is important, and then get it out of the skin as fast as possible. Almost nobody does that. If you do that, it is some of the sweetest, most beautiful, light-colored, fantastic meat ever. But it can go off in a heartbeat. And I can't tell you how many times I have seen guys riding around in a truck. Because here's what also happens. Maybe the 3 of us go antelope hunting. And well, I'm in the truck, so I'm going to make it sure it's okay. But if it wasn't me, it was 3 guys in a truck. They're typically going to shoot 3 antelope, and they'll pile them in the truck, ungutted. And it's September in Wyoming, and it's maybe 80 degrees. Maybe it's 70 degrees. And that meat's going to go off in a heartbeat. And that's why people say that pronghorn is disgusting.
Well, that's good news for Dan, because when Dan and I were driving home from our elk hunting trip this past year in Idaho, we drove through Wyoming, and I swear, Hank, every 30 seconds, Dan was like, oh, look in that field. Oh, look in that field. There's more pronghorn. Oh, look at all those antelope. Oh, we got to come hunt these antelope. I got to go pronghorn hunting. For like 2 hours, we drove through the Green River Valley, and that's all he could talk about. So,
hey, I'm a flatlander.
Yeah.
I don't see antelope.
Well, antelope live in flatland. They're plains animals, but they're western plains.
But I'm in Iowa.
The Midwestern flatlander.
We have whitetails and squirrels.
Whitetails.
Yeah.
Yep.
And turkeys.
And turkeys.
So here's another. I'm going off on tangents here, but now that we're talking about pronghorn, if I'm a tried and true deer hunter, let's say I'm Dan, I live in Iowa, and there's just whitetails and squirrels. If I want to, if you could just pick one new hunt for me to go on, specifically just because I want to get like the best wild game, different than what I'm currently eating, which is a lot of whitetail. If I could just choose one new hunt, specifically just for the food standpoint, what would you recommend on that side of things?
Big game or small game?
I'd like to hear both.
Small game, ruffed grouse. The ruffed grouse hunting is not only super incredibly fun, the flavor of that bird is, I think that might be one of my deathbed meals, is a ruffed grouse or a blue grouse in the Western Mountains, plucked and roasted and, with all the trimmings. Big game, you could do worse than pronghorn. I mean, it's a ton of fun. You could do it as a DIY hunt. There's lots of over-the-counter tags. It's a lot of fun to go out and do. And, you can usually get a buck and a doe tag and come home with a couple of pronghorn on a DIY hunt on public land. And, you put in 4 or 5 days. And if you go to like northern Wyoming, you're going to get your antelope.
Yeah, that does look like, that's something I do want to do. It looks like fun. And I'd be really interested to try. I've never eaten it before, so have to make it happen someday.
They're not big. I mean, Dan, you live in Iowa, so you're in the land of the giants. Mm-hmm. But, they're like a big antelope buck is 120, 140. That's a big one.
So we're talking about the average might be the size of my dog.
When you running a Mastiff?
I got a lab. But if the big one's 120, maybe an average is what, 90 pounds and something like that?
About 100, 110.
Yeah.
And then the does are about 100, a little less. Well,
fill both tags in, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'm intrigued.
You do have to be good at shooting, though. I know a lot of you guys in the East are like, I took this amazing shot. It was 225 yards. And, pronghorn's not crazy to shoot 400 yards.
You Western guys are crazy. I can't imagine some of these shots that guys out there take.
I mean, I'm a kind of an average shot, and I'll have routinely taken 300+ yard shots.
Wow. Yeah. If I ever do go out there for that type of thing with a rifle hunt, I'll have some work to do, that's for sure. So back to meat, or cooking meat at least, versus the hunting of the meat. We started getting some different cuts there because you were talking about roasts and stuff. What do you think about just running through a bunch of the different types of cuts that we'll, be able to get out of our deer? And I'd be interested in hearing some of your different ideas. High level. Okay, with a venison roast, you could do X, and then I might have some questions. We can go into the detail of how to do the best job with that, or different cool things on each. But I guess maybe with roast, let's start there, Hank. What are your recommended ways of handling a venison roast? Maybe we've got a neck roast or a shoulder roast or something like that. We talked a little bit about the crock pot idea, but is there anything else that you'd recommend that we consider? Any tips on that?
Well, if you start with, there's a kind of the triumvirate of sinewy, gristly stuff: the shanks, the neck, and the shoulder. So all of them have lots of different muscles in that same group, and lots of connective tissue. And unless it's a gigantic animal, there's not a lot you can do in terms of cutting out single muscle steaks or roasts out of them. So they're dealt with as kind of agglomeration meats, And my favorite thing to do actually with all of them is to cook them whole. So, I didn't shoot a very big deer this year. I shot a little forky blacktail. And so the front shoulder was just barely fit into my roaster pan. And so I decided to braise the whole shoulder. And if you get whitetail does, it's the same deal, or a little button buck. A whole braised shoulder is a wonderful thing to cook because you have all of that connective tissue and it cooks off the bone, and you get the tenderness and it doesn't dry out, and all you need is time on that. Same thing with a neck roast, same thing with a shank. You should never ever take the meat off your shanks. You always keep your shanks whole, or if they're gigantic, saw them into ossobuco rounds, which is a cross cut of the shank about 3 inches thick. You do that with a big bruiser whitetail or with a big animal like an elk or a moose. All of those should just be cooked like crock pot or in a Dutch oven until the meat falls off the bone. And that's sort of your highest purpose for all of that.
So with that, let's say we've got a shoulder, like you mentioned. We can fit the whole thing in our Dutch oven. We're going to braise it, slow cook it, like you mentioned. Can you walk us through specifically, how do you think we should be, seasoning it? Can you walk us through basically how would we do that in more detail for the people like us that have no idea what we're doing?
There's a million ways to go about it, but the structure is typically the same. Not always, but typically. Typically, you're going to want to brown the meat first. And if it's a whole piece of meat, like a big neck or a shoulder or something, that you can't fit in your saute pan, then what you do is you stick it in your roasting pan and you crank the heat up to like 450 and you brown it in the oven. That's what we do in restaurants. It's like when we've got a lot of meat to brown for a stew, you throw it in the oven. I mean, I'm not going to stand in front of a frying pan for 2 hours browning meat when you can get it done in an hour in a hot oven. So once your meat is browned, why do you brown it? You brown it because that's called the Maillard reaction. And it's the crust on bread. It's it's any kind of crispy brownness. And humans are hardwired to like crispy brownness. If you don't, I don't know what's wrong with you. You have some genetic deficiency, but everybody likes crispy. Everybody likes that kind of browned meat thing. And that's how you get that. And that carries through, even though it's no longer going to be crispy because you're stewing it or braising it. That flavor carries through. So that's why you brown meats first. Obviously, you've salted it, and it goes into your pan that you're going to braise with. Now, the first thing you do is you take remember that flat wooden spoon I was telling you to get? Mm-hmm. So you pour some water into wherever it is that you brown the meat. And then you use that flat wooden spoon to scrape all of the brown bits off the bottom of the pan, or the roasting pan. And you pour that over the meat. You typically will then throw in some booze, wine, bourbon, beer, something like that. Maybe a cup, a bottle, however much you want. And you have to boil the hell out of it because you don't want to cook it with the alcohol in, and boiling burns off most of the alcohol. The reason why you would do that is if you're doing wine, you're adding acidity, and it helps with a more balanced set of flavors, because a proper dish has a balance of sweet, savory, acidic, a little bit of bitter, a little bit of salty. So I mean, there's sort of the 5 tastes that are on your tongue. You want to recognize that and make your dish accordingly. And so
if I might, sorry, when we're trying to achieve these 5 different types of flavors, is that something you're trying to achieve in a single dish or in the meal? So like, should it be just in the roast, or could that be the roast and the potato and the veggie or something like that?
It's a good question. It's your choice is the answer. So if it's a one-pot meal, it should be in that pot, but it doesn't have to be in the pot the whole time. So all will be revealed. So but if you've added acidity through wine, then you don't need any more necessarily in the dish. But what if you use beer? Beer isn't very acidic. Or what if you use bourbon? Bourbon's not very acidic. That just adds flavor. So then you need broth or water. You've got some water because you've just scraped the bottom of the roasting pan. A braise is a big piece of meat that is not completely covered by the liquid. A stew or a soup, and incidentally, a stew are many pieces of meat that are submerged. A soup is really a broth that has a little bit of meat in it. So the difference between a soup and a stew is that in a stew, the things that are in the broth are the star. In a soup, the broth is the star. And so with all of those, in a braise, you're eventually going to serve large pieces off that whatever. Either a whole shank or a giant chunk of, neck, or just a big old slab of that shoulder. Whereas if you made a stew, you might want to use a hind leg, because the hind leg, you can get cleaner pieces of meat that don't have sinew in them. And so then when you bite into it, you don't have that kind of thing. Like, we've all done that, right? There's a venison stew and that's a great piece, and the next piece is not so great. That's usually a function of connective tissue, which you did not cook it long enough for it to break down. So how long do you cook it? You cook until it's done. I mean, if it's a yearling, Bottenbach or something like that, it might only take 90 minutes. But if you've got, Mr. Big Rack or God help you, a bull moose or a bull elk, which can live to 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15 years old, you'll be there a while. But it'll get tender. Everything gets tender. Just takes time. The worst I ever had, a rooster of all things. I've cooked, I don't know how many different kinds of animals. And the only animal that almost beat me was like a 5 or a 6 year old rooster. That thing took 8.5 hours to get tender.
Like a pheasant rooster or a
No, a rooster.
Rooster.
Yeah, I have Italian neighbors, and they used to like randomly knock on my door and say, "Oh, it is time for you to kill the chickens." I'm like, "All right, Dominic, I'll be over." And so there was this one big old nasty rooster, and I just walked in there, and it was in like they have like their coop is like Thunderdome. It's like it's devastated inside by all the birds, and it's caged up, and the birds can't fly out, and it's like 2 men enter, 1 man leaves, and so I finally cornered this chicken and grabbed it and wrung its neck, and my friends were standing out there watching the show. Their eyes were as big as saucers, and I looked at it and like, look at that rooster. That thing had 3-inch spurs on it.
Yikes.
I could have died.
Yikes.
But anyway, we digress.
Yeah. Wow. So you're boiling off the alcohol, but then after that you're bringing the heat way down low, right, to just a simmer. Is that right?
Exactly.
And then you just keep on rolling until you can start pulling it apart, probably, right? That's how you can tell that it's done.
And typically, what stays in there the longest are the meat itself, because that's what you're really waiting on. And then I usually have kind of a onions and garlic and oil. I cook some onions and garlic in there as well, and have that cooking the whole time. And you add stuff to a braise or a stew in the order that it's going to work, right? So you assume your venison's going to take 2 hours, maybe 2.5, maybe 3. So you don't want to put potatoes and carrots and things in there 3 hours in, because they're going to disintegrate, unless that's what you want, which is sort of that's the theory behind a Kentucky burgoo, is you cook everything together and it just gets completely hammered, and it tastes great, but it's just a different way to do things.
Wow.
Typically though, you'll wait for the last 90 minutes, and then you'll throw in like your root vegetables, and then you'll throw in stuff that's a little bit more tender. And then finally, you're throwing in at the very end, like I don't even cook it. I just let the heat of the stew finish it. Things like parsley or thyme or herbs like that, that are very soft and very, they can go easily turn army green. Like if I wanted to put like kale or turnip greens or something, I'd put those in maybe 10 minutes before I'm serving.
Interesting. That sounds pretty good. I'm liking the idea here, because that just probably is hitting me because I'm really hungry right now, and it's about dinner time and I haven't eaten yet.
Yeah, I mean, like, so let's say if you crock potted it, let's say you're going to work, you throw, you're throwing everything in, the onions, the meat, the booze, the broth, and you browned everything, you cooked off, and then it goes in the crock pot, then you go to work. So you probably have a good 30, 40 minutes of work to do before you get it to the crock pot. And then, probably 40 minutes. And then you get it, you come home, and then the second you come home, you throw in your root vegetables. Then you pop open a beer, you talk to your wife, pet the kids, or play with the pets, or the opposite. I don't know what you guys do, have kids. I don't have kids. So, and then by the time that, you're done with that, then your root vegetables are done. Then just throw in your green things, and then wait 10 minutes, you're good to go.
Nice. Sounds simple enough.
Yeah, it has endless variations too.
Is there any other completely different way to think about doing a roast other than that basic slow cook in a crock pot or a Dutch oven or something?
Yes, hind leg roasts. I only cut single muscle hind leg roasts. So what I do is I take a hind leg apart like a book. It's called seam butchery. We talked a little bit about it last time.
Yep.
And it's all about respecting the individual muscles of the hind leg and working with them as individual muscles. And if you do that, you don't have to deal with, the infamous leg steak or the fact that you have connective tissue running right through the center of your roast, which is utterly changes the game. If you don't have that, then you can cook a roast more or less like a steak. So here's what I do with, let's just say, the rump roast, which is that big rectangular one that you'll get. It's one piece of muscle. All you have to do is you bring it to room temperature. And the reason I do that is because if you don't do that, the outside of that meat is going to be much more cooked than the center, and you get what's called black and blue. And some people like it, but I don't. So you salt the meat. Actually, here's what I do. All right, I've got the roast, and I take the roast out of the fridge. I coat it with some oil, and then I salt it, and then I let it sit there for a half an hour. I'll turn the oven on, and then just pop it right in the oven, cold oven. And then by the time it gets to be 300 degrees, which is what I set it at, you're good to go. That's all you do. You're just sitting it in there. If you really are concerned about excess browning, you can set the roast up on celery sticks to keep it up off the bottom of the roasting pan. Gets a little better air circulation that way. I do this with birds. And then you cook it at 300 degrees until the interior of that roast. Oh, here's another piece of equipment I forgot about. A thermometer. You need a meat thermometer.
Yeah.
And you wait until that thermometer hits about 115. Then you take the roast completely out of the oven. And now you jack the oven up to 450. And it's going to take a couple of minutes. It'll probably take 15 minutes or so for your oven to go the extra 150 degrees. When it does, you put the meat back in the oven and brown it that way. And then when it's brown, which should take 10 minutes, 15 minutes at that temperature, then you let it rest for a solid 10 to 15 minutes. And when you do that, here's the trick. You take the internal temperature right as you're resting it. It's going to climb about 10 degrees. It'll climb 15 degrees if it's a giant roast, but typically a roast is going to be 5 to 10 degrees rise. If you're low, let's say it's 120 and you want it to be 135, which is a good medium rare, tent it. It will gain more temperature because you're holding in the heat. Do you guys know about this, how carryover heat works?
I wouldn't say so. At least I don't.
Okay. So here's why you cook low first and then hot second. If you cook hot first to brown and then finish it up in the oven, it works. But the problem you have is you have a shitload of carryover heat on the outside of the meat, and the interior does not have that. So the way carryover works is that it is the exterior of that meat could be 400 degrees, but the interior is 115. And carryover in that resting process is a redistribution of meat within the roast, or redistribution of heat within the roast. So what you get is that 400 on the outside equalizes with 110 or 115 in the center, and you finally end up with 135 or 140 in the center instead of 115. And the outside is much cooler as well. That's why hot things have more carryover heat. Big things have more carryover heat. Lean meat has more carryover heat. When that's you're talking venison in that case, because fat is an insulator, and beef has quite a bit of it. But venison doesn't, so it will tend to have at least a degree or 2 degrees more carryover heat than a comparably sized roasted beef. So there's science in here. It's tricky to some extent, but your general rule is hot second, because that you get more precision that way. And then God help you if you don't rest your roast, because otherwise all of the molecules are bouncing around in that roast the second you take it out of the oven. And if you cut it at that moment, you basically have a Niagara Falls of juices.
Mm-hmm. So when you said to tent it afterwards to even out that heat, that was after you take it out, tent it, and you rest it with the tent, right? With aluminum foil?
Yes, if it's a little low. If it's not a little low, if you're exactly 10 degrees below where you want it to be, don't tent it.
And just let it sit 10 minutes, right?
Just let it sit 10 minutes.
All right. Man, I always struggle with the rest. I know that you're supposed to do it, and so I've been doing it more and more, but it always just seems counterintuitive to me. It's going to be cold, but I know I just need to resist and let it rest. So I'm trying, Hank. I'm trying.
Here's what you should do. When you take the meat out of the oven, then start making your pan sauce. It will force you to rest 10 minutes.
That's a good idea. Speaking of sauces, and tangents. We're all about tangents here.
That's what a conversation is.
Yeah. Sauces. What are some of your recommended sauces for this type of thing, for roasts and stuff like that?
Well, you can't go wrong with gravy. You guys know how to make a good gravy?
I actually do know how to make a gravy. I don't know if it's a good gravy, but it's a gravy.
Is it a flour and butter gravy, or is it a
Basically. Yeah.
Okay.
We throw some flour and make a sort of roux, right?
Yep.
Some milk.
You could do a milk gravy. I'm not a huge fan of milk gravy, but that's just a personal preference. Let's take it a different way. Let's do a very typical pan sauce, something that I do on a weekly basis, either with venison backstrap. I can do it with a roast, and I do it a lot with ducks. So, okay, you're done cooking it. The meat's resting. You've got all this fat in the pan. Or if you don't, you add enough to have 2 tablespoons. You mince up a shallot or a white onion, and I mean mince, I cut it small, and then you cook it in that fat. Then when it's mostly cooked, you're going to want to take maybe a clove or 2 cloves of minced garlic and add that. Cook it for 1 minute. Then pour in, I like either port wine or red wine. You could go bourbon. You could go a malty dark beer, something with some character in it. And then cook that off. Boil it until it's almost sticky. And one way to tell that is the entire surface of the pan will be bubbles. There'll be no part of the pan that is appearing to be still.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not stirring it.
You're not stirring it.
Okay.
Then you throw in, I like to cook down stock. I make my own venison stock, and I'll cook it down until it's concentrated, and I'll throw a cup of that in, and I'll boil that. And while it's boiling, I'll usually throw in a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of either wild berry syrup or a wild berry jelly. Don't do jam. And why would you do that? Because sweetness and berries go really, really well with venison. And it as it happens, pretty much every berry that we forage for, deer also eat. And it's kind of a truism that if the animal eats it, you can eat it with the animal. So you've got a little sweetness, you've got a little booze, you've got a little bit of stock to add some savory, you've got the onions and the garlic in there, you got a little bit of fat. You boil that until you remember your wooden spoon with a flat edge on it. You're going to use it one more time. You're going to scrape that across the middle of the boiling stuff, and if it leaves a trail that takes a second or so to disappear, you're ready. And you can serve it like that. But what I do is I'll turn the heat off, and I'll put maybe a tablespoon of butter in there and swirl it around.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. I think maybe I've tried that sauce before. Maybe one of your other recipes online. I think maybe that was included because that sounds really familiar.
Yeah, it's a standard structure that I use all the time.
Yeah.
I accidentally made a good gravy once, and it was your standard flour gravy, but then I added like a couple spoonfuls of apricot jelly, and it worked. It tasted really good, and I've never been able to replicate it again.
In a gravy?
In a gravy, yeah.
Yeah, that'll work. Basically, you're making I know. You're making a kind of a roux-based sauce espagnole if you wanted to get,
that's what I was going for.
Right.
Really.
Wow.
A little bit of tomato paste is another good idea too.
Huh. You mentioned. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you make that regular gravy, the regular brown gravy with the roux and the stock and everything. Throw 1 spoonful of tomato paste, and it'll you'd be surprised at how good that is.
You mentioned stock there. That you make your own venison stock. How do you do that? And is it that much better than anything else?
I do it because I don't live in whitetail country, so I'm lucky if I get 2 deer a year. And I want to get the most out of every animal that I bring home. And I butcher all my own animals myself, so I have all the bones. You need bones, and you need a little bit of meat to make a good stock. So what I do is I will take leg bones, and this is I get asked this question a lot from whitetail hunters because, what if I live in an area that has chronic wasting disease? Well, in that case, if you have not tested your your deer, then I would only use the leg bones, because if your deer happens to have that rogue protein in it, chances are it's going to be either in the spinal column or in the head. So I wouldn't use anything from the pelvis to the head. And you roast those bones. And I also add, to make it a better stock, maybe bits of ribs, maybe the meat between the ribs, all that weird sinew that you trim off. All of that goes great in the stock. It's a way to not waste anything. I mean, you should see. I mean, when I'm done with a deer, what's left in the trash, it doesn't even fill a 1 gallon bucket. Because it can all be used. Then you just roast that the same way you'd roast meat for a braise, and then you basically cover it with water, and then you cook it very, very, very slowly for as long as you can stand it. A minimum of 4 hours, and I generally go overnight.
And then after that, you just filter it out and store
You
it?
can. After that, usually I put in vegetables, and I'll let that cook for another 90 minutes, and then I filter it. And then it can keep in the fridge for a week to 10 days, then the freezer for kind of a year or so, or you can pressure can it for a year.
And then that's what you're using when you're making a pot roast or something, right? For your broth, you're just putting that venison stock in there. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
I like that idea. I love the idea of using that from an old deer from a past deer to cook another deer,
Yep.
or maybe the same deer. Shoot, who knows? That's pretty cool. How about another cut of venison, of deer? What about, well, I don't know if you call it a cut, but what about our ground venison? There's the standards, make burgers, and then there's a whole ton of other ways to use ground. What are some of your favorite ways to use ground venison? I'd love to dive into some of those. But before we get to that, Hank, we need to pause for just a minute or two to thank our sponsors of this podcast episode, Redneck Blinds. And last week we heard from Sean Luchtel of Heartland Bowhunter about how redneck hay bale blinds have changed his hunting. And I thought today I'd share just a couple quick examples of how those blinds have changed my hunting and how I've been able to utilize them in the field. Now, I personally first tried a hay bale blind from Redneck this spring while turkey hunting. And good things started happening pretty quickly, as that very first morning I hunted from one, I killed a nice gobbler that had no idea it was there. Then the next afternoon, actually, I was able to call in another tom to that same blind right in close, while my dad, myself, and my friend Josh all were in the blind, and my dad was able to kill that tom, which was actually his very first turkey. So that was just an awesome experience to share with my dad. Now, fast forward to this October, and me and Josh were in that blind again, and we had a great hunt and killed a doe just 15 yards away that had no idea we were there again. I think that's the coolest thing about these blinds. They are so dark inside, no deer can see you, and being a hay bale, they simply blend in with what deer are used to. So, in short, I've been pretty darn happy with these blinds. It's a blast to hunt from, being on the ground and knowing that you're going to be so well concealed. Makes for a great hunt. So if you're interested in trying out one of these redneck hay bale blinds, as I mentioned last week, we've got a special deal for you. From now through the end of 2015, you can get $200 off your purchase of the Sportsman hay bale blind. That's $200 off if you use the promo code WIRED. That's WIRED. Use the promo code WIRED at checkout. So visit redneckblinds.com and use promo code WIRED to get $200 off. Now, let's get back to Hank, who's going to fill us in on his favorite ideas for ground venison.
I think probably the ways that I might do that maybe not everybody else does, because everybody does meatloaf and everybody does burger, everybody does chili. I really like meatballs, and I make lots and lots of different kinds of meatballs. And it's because meatballs are A, fun to eat, and B, pretty much every culture that eats meat eats meatballs. And even the cultures that don't eat meat eat things that look like meatballs.
Fair enough.
And so you could go Japanese, you could go Middle Eastern, you could go Italian, you could go Greek, you could go German, go Swedish meatballs, you could go British. Virtually every culture, there's albondigas in Mexico. Virtually every culture that they all have a meatball, and it all works with ground venison. And it's a really good way to use up tons and tons of. I mean, in fact, my ground venison typically goes before my backstrap.
Wow. So any keys to a good meatball?
Fat. You can't do it without fat. I mean, you can, but they suck. I've had, oh, well, you could just put like an egg and some breadcrumbs. You could, but they're just not nearly, that's a pale shadow of what a meatball really should be.
So when you say fat, how exactly are we putting the fat in there? Are you just saying we should have pre-ground our venison with fat, or are we adding something additional afterwards when we're actually making the meatball?
I would say you should have pre-ground your venison with fat. And I choose pork fat, but some people do beef fat. I'll also toss in a little bit of venison fat for flavor. But if you had fatless ground venison, which is a sad thing, then yeah, I would ground up some bacon. And if you don't have a meat grinder handy, just chop up some bacon and throw it in a food processor, buzz it until it's quasi a paste, and then throw that in there. You got to have some fat, otherwise it's just going to taste weird.
And then from there, we're basically rolling up some ground meat into balls, and we're just tossing them in the oven. Or is there?
Well, you've got spices you can put in. You've got a good meatball. Virtually every culture's meatball has a bread product or something in like it, either rice flour or breadcrumbs or bread soaked in milk, something like that. Barley, I've seen that. Because it's sort of counterintuitive. You would think that it would be a better meatball if it was all meat, but for whatever reason, they tend to be a little bit leaden and a little bit bullets. When you have breadcrumbs or some kind of a bread product in, they're much lighter and fluffier, and they're much more fun to eat.
Interesting. You mentioned a second ago, my mind's going here because you mentioned meatloaf as one of the standards that so many people try with ground venison. And growing up, I hated meatloaf. Meatloaf just sounded nasty, and every time I tried it, it was kind of gross.
I had the same thing.
Yeah, but I tried your recipe, and I now love it. That is one of my top couple things that I get excited about us cooking is that venison meatloaf recipe. How do you make a meatloaf that doesn't suck?
You don't think of it as a meatloaf. You think of it as a giant meatball. And if you think of it as a giant meatball, with the bread in it, with some vegetables in it, with some, some seasoning already in it. But the key is that, is to work that mixture so that you get a bind, and then slow cook it and think of it like a meatball, and you're good to go. I mean, I've had some really dreadful meatloafs in my time, and it's usually because they didn't put enough fat in it. It didn't bind. It got crumbly, dry, or they decided that they were going to put big pieces of cheese in the middle of the meatloaf, and that would melt. Ugh, God, terrible.
Yeah, I could see there being a lot of foul plays on a meatloaf like that.
Ugh.
I grew up in a good meatloaf house.
That's good.
Was yours? What style of meatloaf did you grow up with?
We had the two kinds. We had the one where it was just your basic egg breadcrumb mixture with bacon on top, with the ketchup type mixed with brown sugar type layer on top.
Uh-huh.
And the second one was a Reuben. So it was actually ground up turkey with sauerkraut wrapped in it, and then the same kind of bacon and ketchup crust on the top. It was really good.
Now, that one sounds kind of cool, actually.
Wow. I'm going to stick to my venison meatloaf. But interesting, though. I'm kind of playing scatterboard here. What about the chili? You mentioned chili. That's something that everyone likes to make with ground venison. I think this might be true for everyone, but everyone thinks they have the world's best chili recipe.
Mine actually is.
Right. I think my wife's is the best chili, but I saw yours, and you're claiming it as well, Hank. Can we talk about chili? What makes a great chili?
There's only one way to solve that problem.
Tell me, Dan.
We have to have a chili cook-off.
Deal.
And I will be the judge.
Deal.
Okay. I don't have much hope.
Set this up, Mark.
Yeah, we should. But so first then, Hank, tell me your secrets.
So my chili is a little bit different from a lot of chilies in most of the country because my chili takes a very deep nod to actual Mexico, and it has very little tomato product in it. It's got a little bit of tomato paste, but mostly it's chilies. It's those dried chilies that you get in a Mexican market, and they're puree. They're reconstituted and pureed, and then it has molasses in it. It's got coffee in it. It can have beans. I typically do beans, but when I'm in Texas, I leave them out because they will kill you if you put beans in Texas and Mexico or in Texas. They get really uptight. Like all of your listeners who are from Texas are gonna be like, "It's a nice stew, but there was beans in it, so it was not chili." They really take it seriously.
Wow.
And I will most often use ground meat, but sometimes I use chopped or cubed or diced meat as well. And it's just a very different chili than most people make. It's not very heavy on vegetables. It's got a lot of onions in it, but no green peppers, nothing else kind of floating around in it. It's all of the vegetables that you want with it will go on top. Like cilantro and pickled onions and chili peppers, that kind of thing.
Pretty spicy?
It can be, but I typically make it so that it's just very warm. And then if you want to make it spicy, you either throw hot sauce on at the end or you throw pickled jalapenos on at the end.
Love that. Is there any other, I think the standard soup of sorts, I don't know if you technically call it soup, but the standard venison or ground venison type soup is a chili, if we're talking about that kind of meal. I've never tried any other types of soups, I guess, other than like a basic beef and vegetable soup, but mixing in venison instead of the beef. Any other soup ideas for venison, ground venison or otherwise?
I don't know that I would do it with ground venison, although meatball soups are really good. So you make little teeny meatballs and throw them in the soup. Those are great. In fact, I have a recipe similar to that. Italian wedding soup?
Yeah.
It's, that's great with venison. And you can do it one of two ways. You can do it with the little teeny meatballs. Or you can do it. There'll be a recipe for it. Actually, my next book is this other way. Is you take the shank or your shoulder or neck and you just braise the heck out of it, and then you shred it up, and then it's a very thick stew made with the broth that you just braised that with, and then lots and lots and lots of vegetables, and it's a rib sticker, and it's got lots of cabbage and things like chicories in it and dandelion greens and kale, and it's a really good hearty winter soup, and it's used with really garbage parts of the venison.
That sounds pretty good. Speaking of all that stuff you just mentioned, dandelion greens and kale and stuff like that, if I wanted to make like a all from the field meal, so I've got some vegetables from my garden maybe, and I've got my venison, what would like the best all-purpose thing I can grab from the woods typically to add to my meal? Would it be like a dandelion green or something like that, or what should I be looking for when it comes to gathering something natural that might be an all-purpose type deal?
Well, you could do a lot worse than morel mushrooms, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's true.
And they dry really well to use all year round. Dandelions are good. If you're up in the Great Lakes, wild rice. God, it's just, that's a hard question because it's just, where are you? What time of year is it? It's just, there's so many variables of what you could possibly do. But I mean, the one thing that pretty much everybody listening to this will have some kind of access to would be morel mushrooms.
And they're so good.
Oh yeah. And they dry perfectly well. So I've got jars and jars and jars of them, basically dried, waiting for venison season.
Yeah, that's one thing that I never grew up in a mushroom hunting family or anything like that, but I've decided that I need to get into that because holy smokes, they're good.
Oh yeah. I mean, I live in the West, so I have an advantage. Wherever there was a big giant fire the year before, then I go there the next year, and that's where the morels are. You guys have natural morels, and so you have patches that come up year after year after year, and they're heavily guarded. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know guys who have just gone to their deathbed and they haven't even told their wives where those mushrooms were.
I've got a buddy whose dad will let you turkey hunt his various farms and properties, but if you touch morels, you're as good as dead. You better not touch the morels.
That's hilarious because he'll probably knows too. Like,
oh yeah, yeah. There's always like rumors of how many pounds of morels he's found, but you never know where. He never shares.
What state is this?
Michigan.
Oh yeah, Yeah, that's got to be May too. That's late.
Yep, that sounds about right. Yep.
When I'm picking morels in May, I'm usually at 6,000 feet.
Wow. I rarely get over 60 feet here in Michigan. So moving on from ground, let's talk our back straps. Last time we talked, I think we asked you about like the perfect way to grill a steak, and I think you talked about some stuff with the back strap there. But any other unique preparations or any of your other standbys that we didn't talk about last time when it comes to using that back strap? I'd love to hear a couple different ideas for our listeners on that.
Well, one of the interesting things, this is, it's a little sporty. You're talking about unique. I mean, other than just cooking it in a pan, I really like venison tartare, and you make it out of the backstrap. And if you've never had that, that's basically chopped raw venison, and it's served usually with shallots and often with some roasted red pepper and spices and salt, like usually crunchy salt, like, that big crunchy flaky salt. And you drop an egg in the center of it, an egg yolk. And it's a classic dish. It's big in Wisconsin. I first actually had it in Wisconsin.
Eat
And
that with bread.
Actually with toast. Yeah.
Toast. Okay.
Although I've seen it eaten in a little ghetto with like Wonder Bread. I'm like, really, guys? Like, all right.
Wow.
But I mean, it's the reason why you can do that is no one really gets sick from venison. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. But in terms of a food safety standpoint, if it's been frozen, if you're fresh, I mean, people just don't get sick from it. What you would want to do, if you were at all worried, is deal with it right out of the freezer. It should be cold anyway. It's also easier to cut when it is right out of the freezer. And you have to cut it. I personally don't like ground meat tartare. It's weird to me. I like it. What you do is you take a little piece of backstrap, maybe, I don't know, a little goes a long way with tartare. So let's say you're feeding 4 and you wouldn't feed it it's kind of a party appetizer. It's not something that you sit down with a big plate of. So maybe take a half a pound, and it's semi-thawed, and that makes it very easy to cut into very small dice. The French term would be a brunoise, which is, I think, French for the worst cut you're going to make your rookie chef do, because it's these tiny little dice. For a tartare, it doesn't have to be dice, but brunoise is actually squares. If they're not squares, the head chef yells at you. But anyway, small pieces is what I mean. And if you do that, and then you mix things with, I have a recipe I'm very happy with on the website, which is I can share with you if you want.
Yeah.
That recipe is very Nordic, and it's done almost exclusively with backstrap. Let me bring it up here. I don't have it memorized, sorry.
We won't judge.
I know I have like 1,000 recipes on the site, and it's one of those things like, well, you don't remember them all? Like, no, that's why I have the website.
Yeah. So
it's basically venison cut into tiny little pieces.
We're still talking tartare?
Yes.
Okay.
With one shallot, also cut into little pieces. I take some juniper berries. I really like the taste of juniper with venison. That would be another one of my all-time go-to spices. If you can find juniper berries or buy them online or whatever, venison and juniper love each other. I use them as much as you can. So I chop them up really small, maybe just 1 or 2, just to get some flavor, because it can be strong. A little bit of caraway seeds, a little bit of ground black pepper, smoked salt. Smoked salt is a huge one because it adds that smoky flavor without actually putting heat to it. And then when you serve it, I'll grate some lemon zest over it. I'll add a little bit of vinegar, like right at the end, and then toss that together, and then everybody gets an egg yolk. And it's the egg, you crack that egg yolk, and it becomes the sauce for the tartare. And it's a really, really good, it's a great bite. You serve it on crackers or bread or something crispy.
Sounds a little out there for me, but I can see it being interesting. That's for sure.
If you wanted to strip it down to its classic form, it would be salt, shallot, black pepper, a little bit of acid, citrus or vinegar right when you serve it, and then the egg yolk.
I've had tartare before, and I believe it was lamb tartare, and it was pretty good. It was different, but I liked it.
It's venison sushi.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Speaking of out there, on our last episode with you, Hank, I think you saw this on Twitter. On our last episode, we had asked you for like one really out there venison recipe that people should try, and you had said roast the whole head. I think the venison barbacoa with the head.
Yep.
And did you see that on Twitter? One of our listeners actually tried it and pulled it off.
I did.
That's pretty cool.
Somebody made my. I have a very. Every now and again, I'll get all chefy because I can, and and so I did this dish called Snow in Winter. It's kind of like a Nordic death maginal, recipe for snow goose, and I love it. It's a great dish, but it's all black. The whole plate is black, and it's like you eat it at solstice. Somebody made it. I was like, oh my god, somebody actually made it. That's so cool.
That's got to be pretty cool. Just everything, probably all the different recipes you put out there. When you hear from people, I imagine that's got to be pretty fulfilling. Seeing people enjoying those recipes.
It really is. I mean, especially because the ones that I really, it's kind of both. Like, I love the fact that I have like a billion positive reviews on my smoked salmon and on my venison chili, but I really get a kick out of people who made like the thing like the Snow in Winter. Somebody who actually stretched and did something very difficult, and it worked because not only did my recipe work, but it was also equally important is that the way I wrote the recipe worked so that it was clear enough for them to pull it off. Yeah,
that's a good point, because that's one of the, I imagine, the greatest struggles is conveying some of the nuance in how you're actually preparing it through, a simple sentence or two.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's why, all the recipes that in the upcoming book, and in fact, the duck book as well, they've all been tested by what I call civilians. I don't let chefs test my recipes because they can read shorthand and they'll naturally know what to do. I like to give recipes to regular people who are going to buy the book. And if they can make them and if they like them, then I know the recipe works.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I definitely need the layman's terms for our stuff. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
What about the whole backstrap? Now we're talking a dinner type portion. You shared an appetizer there. There's a standard just grill it whole with some salt. I've tried some different variations, I think, from you and from others with various, like you mentioned, berries and all sorts of different sauces and things to pair it with. Any other favorite when it comes to a dinner portion on the loin thing? What about stuffed loins? I know people do that. Anything like that up your alley that you'd recommend?
I don't. I don't like stuffed loins. I think it's a stunt, and I don't think the result is really very good. Backstrap's your money cut. Don't mess with it. It is what it is, and it's this pure piece of meat that can be enjoyed by everybody, and it is the easiest, most accessible part of the deer. So yeah, I like sauces with it, but most of the time it's like salt, fire, and pepper, maybe a squeeze of lemon. It's just I don't get too esoteric with backstrap very often. Now you could throw it in curry, you could throw it in a Vietnamese soup like pho. You could do Chinese food with it. You could do all of those things, and I do. But if I'm serving like a loin, like a whole loin, I'm not going to mess with it too much.
Last time we talked about grilling the loin, so we talked about how to do it on an outdoor grill. Could you walk us through how you would do that inside? Let's say we're in the middle of the winter, we're not going to use our grill outside. How would be the best way to prepare a whole loin if you're stuck inside?
Just like a roast. Like we talked to, about half an hour ago about how to do that roast in the oven, where you start it low, and then you take, the interior temperature to maybe 110, 115. And then the only difference, though, on this one is you wouldn't put it back in the oven. You would sear it on the in a pan on the stovetop. So basically, you take your whole. I'm assuming it's a boneless piece of venison.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be. It could be chops. But I'm talking about a rack all attached to chops. And you take that, and then you salt it, you oil it, and you cook it in the oven until it's about 110 inside. And then you pull it out, and then you sear it in a roaring hot pan with just a little bit of fat. I like to use, in this case, like grapeseed oil or canola oil, something that has a very high smoke point. And then you just sear it and get all of that crispiness on the outside. Then you let it rest, and then you cut it. And that's probably how I would do it inside, because it's a little bit easier to control than if you try to do it all in the oven.
See, that's new for me, because for some reason I had it backwards. I was searing it, hot on the pan, and then putting the pan in the oven, and then letting go low and slow for a little bit, then to finish it. But you're saying do the opposite.
Either way works, but again, if you do hot second, you have a little bit more control over the internal temperature.
Right. Interesting stuff. Dan, what are you thinking here? Where do you want to go with things next? I've been controlling it for a ways.
No, that's fine. I just, this time in my life, I do not have, unless I have a weekend where the kids are maybe drugged and they don't move. They're just
so like every Tuesday,
basically.
Yeah.
Or when they're on, like sinus medication, like they are right now, I might have some extra time to cook. What's maybe a good recipe for someone who has maybe less than an hour to cook a venison meal?
Well, the crockpot stews and braises we talked about earlier, that's one of them, because that's one of those things that you do in the beginning, and then it's like 30 minutes when you get home from work. Pieces of backstrap. I typically will cut, I don't shoot giant deer, so I will typically cut a foot lengths of backstrap. You take that out when you come home from work to let it come to room temperature. You can just sear that in a pan. You don't even need the oven. Do that pan sauce we talked about, serve it with some mashed potatoes or a salad, you're good to go. I mean, I could do that in 20 minutes.
Gotcha.
Hard to go wrong with that one. That's meat and potatoes. It's a heck of a good meal.
Yeah, I mean, it's super easy. If you had flank meat from the deer, you could do fajitas. That's pretty easy. You could do fajitas with backstrap too. You could do fajitas with whole muscle roasts for the hind leg as well, because you're just you're cutting it up into pieces.
And then just searing it real fast, right?
Yeah, super fast, super hot.
Yeah. Wow, I'm getting hungry, that's for sure. One of the things I for whatever reason I think had on top of my mind earlier on, maybe we were talking about the smoker. What about jerky? I don't think we've talked about this yet at all. Do you dabble in jerky or anything like that at all, Hank?
Oh yeah, I make lots of jerky. I make both ground meat jerky and whole muscle jerky.
Is there a simple way to make good jerky?
Yes. Well, the easiest way would be I do a chipotle jerky that I have on the site, and that's super easy. It's all it requires is a trip down the Hispanic aisle of your local supermarket or to Latin market to get chipotles and adobo, which are very easy to find. Unless you live in a really, really small town, you should be able to find them. And if you don't have them, no big deal. You can use like hot sauce if you want. But basically, the structure is this. It is thinly sliced pieces of venison in a brine. And then you leave them in that brine in the fridge for 2 to 3 days. Because when you dry out the jerky, it's going to lose a lot of its punch. You basically want to create an environment that is so full of flavor that you really would want to eat it as is. But once it's dried out, you're actually good to go, because it's everything mellows out in the drying process. So your basic brine, your minimum brine, would be a 1/4 cup of kosher salt in 1 quart of water. And then when you have that, then you soak the venison in that for 2 to 3 days. That's it. That's all you really need. Everything else is gravy. I mean, I do it with soy sauce because that provides salt. I do it with Worcestershire. That's salt and acid. So, I mean, the basic rule is that you're burying it, submerging it in a very salty brine that has lots of flavor in it, and then you're drying it out. So your easiest way to make it is to take one of those big hind leg roasts and have it partially frozen and slice it thin. And then you put it into the brine.
And how Do you need a special smoker to dry it out, or have you ever done it just using your oven?
Yeah, you can do it in the oven. The new ovens now are very good. They can actually go down to like 175 sometimes. And you basically want to put your oven as low as it'll go. And what I would do is I would put it on a baking sheet that has a drying rack set on top of it. So because it's going to drip, you can't just lie them in your oven. It's going to be bad. And you don't want to put them directly on a surface because the underside is not going to dry very well. You have to keep flipping them over and over and over again. If you have them on a drying rack, then you can, just put them in the oven and then just let them dry. And it takes, 2, 3, 4 hours to do it. The dehydrator takes longer because it's cooler.
I've heard some people say you need to keep the oven door open with like a can of beer or something like that, like a not full can of beer, empty can of beer. Is why do you need to do that?
It promotes air circulation. If you have a convection oven, turn the convection on. It's all about air circulation. That's why, basically you're creating a very hot dehydrator by doing that.
And then the drying rack you mentioned, you could do the same type of thing maybe by putting a pan on the bottom shelf and then just lying your meat on the top just rack in your oven. Would that work too?
You could, but the grates of the rack on the top are very wide, and you'd have to be dealing with very large pieces of jerky to do that. It's not impossible, but you want a finer grate than that.
Okay, I think I can we can get a drying rack. Essentially, take a drying rack that would fit on top of a baking sheet, and then you set it there. So then there's like a half an inch gap between the baking sheet and the top of your drying rack, right?
Yeah, you can get them in any supermarket. You just go to the sort of the house, the kitchen supply section of any supermarket, and they'll have them.
Okay, all right, cool. Well, that seems easy enough.
Yeah, no need to go to like Williams-Sonoma or anything.
Yeah, good, because I don't like shopping there.
I know, very, very, very expensive stuff. Good stuff, but that's where you can have somebody else buy it for you.
Perfect for Christmas. Yeah. So speaking of Christmas, I guess the last thing I have on my mind is if I am hosting a holiday gathering, what would be your single best recommendation for a main course for Christmas or whatever holiday gathering I might have in the coming weeks? What would be your go-to if we haven't talked about it already?
I would say one of the things that we talked about already, which would be a big hind leg roast with, homemade cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, greens, the whole, maybe some dressing, a really, like that big football roast that you get off the hind leg, just the biggest roast you've got off the biggest piece of venison, and then just done to a turn and sliced thin, just like a roast beef, and just nobody can say no to that. That's just a very classic. We know that was served at the first Thanksgiving. There's no evidence that turkey was actually served at the first Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. Either that or the whole crown roast of backstrap. That's another really good way to go. That's it. You want to cook. If you had the means, you could slow roast an entire hind leg. That'd be kind of cool. I've done that before.
Wow.
You do that in a big smoker, and that's pretty cool. Because there's nothing quite like hauling out a big old haunch of venison on a big table and slicing off pieces and throwing them at people.
That'd have the wow factor, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, shoot, I think I've got some good ideas to bust out this holiday season. What about you, Dan? Do you feel a little bit better about upping your game?
Well, as soon as this is over, I'm just gonna go buy the book.
Well, that's an issue, though.
Why not?
Right?
Why is it an issue?
Because I don't think the Venison book, at least, Hank, is not available yet. But can you tell us about that now, actually?
Sure. The Venison book, which is Buck Moose, we wanted to name it that because it's dealing with all different antlered things, so not just deer. We got funding for it on a Kickstarter last November, and it's going to come out in the middle of 2016. We're shooting for late August. You can order it on Amazon now, so that's a good thing. So if you look for Buck Moose on Amazon.com, you'll find it, and then you can reserve a copy. In the meantime, I would direct you to the website, which is Hunter Angler Gardener Cook. It's honest-food.net, and the easiest way really to find me though is just to Google my name. If you Google my name, you'll find hunter, angler, gardener, cook, and just look for venison recipes. And I've got, oh hell, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 venison recipes on the website, and then that should tide you over until the book comes out.
Yeah, I definitely recommend you do that, Dan, because I think I mentioned the first time we talked with Hank, but basically, well, not all, but almost all of the great venison recipes that we whip up here on a regular basis are Hank's. There's definitely been a lot of good ones. Like I said, the meatloaf is a standby. The way you do the backstrap, we've done that a lot. The sauce you mentioned, we've tried. We love that. So there's a lot of good stuff there. So highly recommend it. I'm looking forward to the book too. I think, well, I know I contributed to the Kickstarter campaign, so I've got one guaranteed to come down the road, so I'm excited about that. And like you mentioned, Hank, honest-food.net is the place to go get more information for you. And then you mentioned it's on Amazon, the book, too, right?
Yep.
Cool. Well, Dan, I guess you can't get the recipes from the book now, but you can pre-order it. So there you go.
Right. I'm talking about the other book. I was talking about the other book. I'm sure
Oh.
there's some good stuff in there. Hunt, gather, cook.
Yeah.
Yes, there are. There's way fewer venison recipes in that book, but they're enough to get you tied up. There's enough to tide you over.
And
Long story short, I just need to buy the book and go to the website and start following your instructions instead of trying to cook myself.
Yeah, I mean, I can say you have to, but I mean, it couldn't hurt.
I'm gonna say that.
I think to your point, Dan, kind of is that there's something to be said about just trying new things, right? I think
Right.
some of us kind of fall into the old, we'll just put ground venison in the stuff I usually put my regular ground beef in and make the same regular, same old things. But there's a lot of fun in trying some of these unique preparations and going out of your comfort zone. So it's nice that there's someone and a resource like what you've put out there, Hank, that can help us do that in a way that doesn't make for disastrous results.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, that's really why I do what I do is to be a trusted resource, and so people work hard for their venison, and it kills me when I hear oh, I made this, and I had a guy in Europe cook one of his things at centigrade when he didn't realize that my temperatures were Fahrenheit.
Oh no.
And so what I did after that is I went through every one of my recipes, and I have hundreds of them, and I put degrees Fahrenheit after every single one because I didn't want anybody else to make that mistake.
Yeah, that'd be a doozy, I bet.
Yeah, like really, you really thought I was meaning 400 degrees centigrade? It's like the surface of the sun.
That would be some tough venison, I bet. All right, Hank. Well, this has been great as we've come to expect. So, man, thank you so much for sharing this insight, your ideas, and we'll be sure to include links to all of your stuff on the blog post for this as well.
I appreciate it.
All right. Well, good luck this holiday season with your various cooking escapades. I'm sure you'll be doing some things, and thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I will talk to you soon, I bet.
Sounds great, Hank. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, well, there you go. Another episode is in the books, and I hope you all found that as helpful as Dan and I did. We're both excited to get in the kitchen and try out some of these new ideas. Now, before we let you go, though, one important reminder. As we mentioned earlier today, and as we mentioned last week, we've got an awesome sweepstakes going on for Wired to Hunt, in which we're giving away some great prizes. The first place prize is a brand new Bear Archery Arena 30 bow. Second prize is a Sitka Gear Celsius Shacket and Fanatic beanie. And third prize is a Wired to Hunt hat and t-shirt. So to enter that sweepstakes, go to wiredtohunt.com/holiday, and that will send you to a Facebook page that's hosting this giveaway. Once you get there, you just need to enter your name, email address, birth date, and a code phrase. And that code phrase was only shared during episode 83 of this podcast. That was last week's podcast. I'm not going to tell you what that code phrase is now. Make sure you listen to number 83 if you haven't already. And once you get that code phrase, you'll also enter that in at the page I just mentioned. So the sweepstakes is open until December 24th, 2015, and we'll then announce the winners on the next episode of the podcast after that. So again, visit wiredtohunt.com/holiday to enter that giveaway. Now, also another reminder, if you've been enjoying this show, this podcast, we would really, really, really appreciate it if you could leave a rating or review on iTunes. Well over 400 of you have already done that, and that's unbelievable, and I just appreciate it so much. Sharing that feedback with us is really helpful, and it's very helpful in helping new people decide whether or not they want to listen to the show, so thank you so much for doing that. Speaking of thanks, we also need to thank our partners who help make this show possible, so big thank you to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Lacrosse Boots, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. So, with all that said, thank you again for joining us today. I hope you've got some new inspiration for the kitchen, and of course, I hope you'll stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.